So, good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time you access this video. This is Denise here, and I'm going to present on the second session, which is how is plant-based medicine practiced? And why does your GP not know about this? And as I mentioned before, I don't have teleprompt. I'm reading this off a whiteboard, so excuse me as I check it out. Okay, so the history of medicine. How is it that only recently we've started to hear about plant-based physicians, plant-based nutritionists, even plant-based nurses? I myself am a whole food plant-based integrated medical coach. I was a registered nurse for a number of years, but I left the profession. I stayed registered for quite some time, and I had a very thorough training in nursing, but I felt very overwhelmed by the fact that I didn't really see many patients getting better. In fact, I mostly saw them, the revolving door. They kept coming in and out, coming in for operations, having more side effects from their treatments, etc., etc. So how has this situation happened that we just recently have such thing as plant-based medical professions? Well, in order to understand that, you have to understand the history of medicine. Originally, medical practitioners were mostly the priests or the assistant priests or priestesses that were linked to the religious establishments or religious institutes. Think of ancient Greece, Rome, the temples, the healing temples, particularly in ancient Greece. Hippocrates, he was a teacher, he was a healer, and they practiced mostly in a given location, and they had sort of like universities in that the practitioners, the skilled practitioners, would pass on their knowledge to the younger acolytes. Now, this was all well and good while there was no real outside influence. According to a lot of historians, the ancient cultures in Arabia were very advanced in medicine, primarily because they were allowed to practice on corpses, which was not seen as something that was commonly practiced. And as a result of that, they gained a great deal of understanding and knowledge of the human anatomy. Going back to ancient times, during these times, women were actually, in many cultures, allowed to practice medicine, and they practiced it on a local level. Herbalists, midwives, helping as priestesses and as nuns. So women had an active role in medicine. That kind of started to fall apart in the Middle Ages when universities were established and education was primarily given to the clergy. It was run by the church, and so medical practice was controlled by the religious establishments, and there was a lot of ignorance. When we had the renewal, basically when there was a revitalization of knowledge, the universities started to use a lot of the old books from ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and they learnt a lot as well. And that happened around about the time of the Crusades, because documents were being passed up from the Middle East and Arabia to European nations and throughout the churches and the monasteries. So during that time, there was a correlation of medical practitioners and folklore practitioners, and that was seen as fairly normal. Those who were rich went to expensive doctors that had university educations, and those who were poor went to the local healer. Eventually that sort of deteriorated quite a bit when women were banned from even practicing folkloric medicine, during the witch hunts. And that was very sad, because that extended over about a period of about 500 years. And women were persecuted. So we lost a lot of our understanding of natural healing, of plants, of herbalism and practices. But this is primarily in European nations. This is not necessarily in Asian countries. So there is a big difference. The scientific revolution was the next thing that hit medicine, and it reduced medicine and the healing practices to a pure science, which was good in some ways because it raised the level, but bad in others, in that science tended to take a reductionistic approach and see each part of a human being as elements of a whole, but elements. And so there wasn't an integrated approach. By the 1950s, the medical universities, which had developed over about 500 or 600 years from the Middle Ages, they started to accept funding from lobby groups. These lobby groups were things like the meat industry, the egg industry, the dairy industry, various pharmaceutical industries, etc., etc. That influenced how the doctors and the medical students were trained, because this had never happened before. Previously, the church had influenced how medicine had evolved and developed, and so there was ignorance and bigotry, and there was sexism. Adam and Eve story: women are lesser. Women are just the oven in which the baby is baked, type of thing. And so scientific moving forward of that was very helpful, but then it struck out when all of the scientific research required a lot of investment. It is very expensive to do scientific research in medical issues. Don't get me wrong. It requires a huge amount of money. And so the universities started to take funding for that. And there was an exponential increase in understanding and knowledge on how the body actually worked on a cellular level. And that was very, very useful. The problem is that those lobby groups had, because of the amount of money that they were pouring into the medical universities, they had a way to influence what was actually being taught. And they started to skew the practice of medicine towards a very unholistic approach, but also they played down the influence of poor diet, particularly diet from eating animal products and animal proteins, on people's health. And so it turned it over. Instead of helping people be healthy, the focus came on treating their symptoms and treating part of their symptoms and isolation. And as a result of that, they took a lot of the pharmaceutical companies, they took very traditional healing practices and plants, and they changed the molecular structure so that they could patent it, and then they could have financial control. As a student nurse working in a cardiac ward, one of the common drugs that we handed out was digoxin, and it was made from digitalis, which is actually a plant. It's a very common plant, and it's a very useful plant for actually treating cardiac conditions. But the pharmaceutical companies copied the molecular structure, changing it so they could patent it, and then they could charge. And digoxin is not an overly expensive drug, but the number of people that are actually on digoxin is a huge number. So they make a lot of money out of this, and they don't have to do any more research because they've already done it once. And so there's a big turnover on that. So it's a very lucrative business. So let's have a look. The acceptance of funds from the lobby group leads to the control of what is taught in the medical schools and this influenced nutrition. Okay, not many people know that doctors go through their whole medical training with literally no more than 8 hours training in nutrition. You think that a doctor trains 6 to 8 years, possibly 10 years if he or she is a specialist, and yet they get only 8 hours training in nutrition. You go to your doctor assuming that your doctor understands nutrition, and your doctor, in most cases, understands as much as you do. He or she may have a better understanding of the biological processes of the body, but in actual fact, what sort of food to eat and how to eat it, when to eat it, how often to eat it straight over their heads. But they don't like to, you will not find many medical practitioners that would like to admit that, okay? And there is a lot of ego involved. And as a student nurse, I saw this in the hospitals. It was very sad. A lot of the medical practitioners were in poor health themselves. They didn't know how to eat properly. They ate irregularly. Their hours are dreadful. The medical students go through horrendous sleep deprivation, and it really wrecks their health. But they keep on going because they're wedded to science, they're wedded to medicine. And hospitals are set up in such a way that each department is responsible for certain things. So we started having nutritionists and dietitians. Now, dietitians and nutritionists did not really exist until about the 1950s. I think the earliest ones were in the 1940s, very, very rare. And it was more like psychologists and psychiatrists. There was a rapid growth in them as all of the different parts of treating patients became more like the Henry Ford factory style of, building cars, treating people, that sort of thing. Nutritionists and dietitians, they're similar, but somewhat different in the qualifications and the role that they play. We'll have a look at that next week. We'll be going into that and looking who you can go to and trust and that sort of thing. We may even be lucky and have a specialist nutritionist come and talk to us. So we'll wait and see what happens there. Okay, so round about this time that we're starting to get nutritionists and dietitians in hospitals, a doctor by the name of Colin Campbell, who was a researcher, became involved in what was known as the China study. Now, this is the world's largest study of nutrition that has ever been undertaken. And it was unbelievable. It was a cooperation between America, and it used statistics from, I believe it's from looking at the firefighters and also the nurses study. Both the firefighters and nurses in America and several developed countries regularly give blood and other bodily secretion samples so that they can be tested for their health as part of ongoing social research. And in China, what happened was Joe and Lai came down with cancer. I think it was liver cancer. And he was dying and he wanted to leave a legacy. So he instigated a research in the whole of China to look at the diet of the common people. Now, Dr. Colin Campbell was part of a team that took that information and processed it with the Beijing Institute of Medical Research, and they produced the statistics, which was like that big. And this is back in the days when computers were like, they had the same technology as maybe your remote control for the TV. There was an unbelievable undertaking. As a result of that, they saw a lot of correlations between diet and the occurrence of disease and cancers, and also degenerative disease such as heart attacks, strokes, diabetes. So the China study is even today seen as the most influential book in Western history on nutrition, and possibly in China. I'm not too sure. I know that the Dr. Greger and the PCRM, Dr. Bernard and Dr. Campbell are held in esteem in China, but how much of an influence I'm not terribly certain. So the pilot studies on changing people, there was, as a result of that, there were some pilot studies conducted to change people's diets to see if they could help them to heal from disease. Now, this is a very revolutionary way of thinking. And one of the doctors, there was several doctors that pioneered these, but one of the doctors we'll look at is Dr. Dean Ornish. And he started a pilot program, which was basically he was given the patients that really didn't have much of a future. And they were not seen as likely to survive. And so he put them on a diet, a plant-based diet, no oil, no salts, no other inflammations, no dairy, no animal products at all. And what happened was these people rapidly got better. And this was all recorded. The statistics were shared, but then they were suppressed because it was so radical that it started to cause a number of problems within the medical institutions and the hospitals and the universities, but primarily hospitals, because instead of patients coming in, instead of patients coming in and being repeat business, and trust me, triple bypass operations are extremely expensive, the patients started to get better and they didn't need to come to the hospitals. And pharmaceutical companies were, looking at this and saying, this is not on. And as a result of that, a number of these pilot programs were severely squashed. And several of these doctors actually went sideways and set up separate clinics so they could run their own programs. Some of them self-funded, and they kept all of the diagnostic reports and things like that. They kept on going against the mainstream, and a lot of them were ridiculed and criticised, and some of them were almost, kicked out of the medical profession because of what they were doing. But they had amazing results. Now, this all kept on going, so 1970s to 1980s, until we had a number of they weren't actually doctors. Nathan Pritikin and Dr. Atkins, two extremes. Nathan Pritikin basically had heart disease. He reversed his heart disease by diet, and he was a runner, and he promoted a plant-based diet. Dr. Atkins, on the other hand, he promoted a diet of heavy animal products and heavy protein. Dr. Atkins did eventually die. There is a lot of controversy about his death, and I wasn't there, so I don't know for certain. But when I've listened to a number of plant-based doctors, such as Dr. Greger, Dr. Bernard, Dr. Campbell, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Clapper, all of them who were colleagues of Dr. Atkins, mentioned that he was in very poor health and was an example of his own dietary dysfunction, so to speak. Following that, so basically medicine was sort of separate from diet, but on the outside of it, you had like this separation of plant-based as to heavy protein animal-based. And this has resurfaced again, where you have the whole food plant-based vegan type diets, and you have the paleo diets, and the keto diet. It's just what is old is new again type of thing. And we will be having a look at that a little bit later. And I know that a couple of you have actually tried keto diets and have lost weight, but long-term they're very damaging to the body. Okay, so how does that affect us today? Well, basically, the medical establishments have not really taken a very strong stance, and the universities have not taken a strong stance to promote plant-based eating, even though it is far better for the body. If you could sort of think of it in these terms, they're basically just cutting themselves out of a job, and that's how they perceive it, which is very, very sad. And people who suffer are the common folk. because most people put their faith in doctors and they trust them to be able to give them the very best of advice. Now, I'm not saying that doctors are bad. I'm just saying that they are a product of their own education. Most doctors, male or female, go into the profession with very noble ideals, and they work extremely hard, and they should be respected for working extremely hard. However, there are limitations on them. And if you understand that, then knowing how to take care of your health, you become empowered, because a doctor is not God. Doctors do not heal people. They provide an environment, or they may do certain things that help to promote healing, but it's actually your body, yourself, that heals your body, okay? It is you who heals your body, not the doctor. And knowing this is very, very empowering. Now, this has led to a situation where there is quite a big split in the medical profession, so that you have a group of doctors called plant-based physicians. And as a result of that, you also have the correlating medical professionals such as plant-based nurses, plant-based nutritionists, plant-based dietitians, not so much more plant-based nutritionists. And these practitioners will look to using diet to help the body to heal rather than pharmaceuticals or surgical intervention. Now, where does that leave you as a customer or as a client or as a patient? It leaves you very empowered, because if you can find one of these medical plant-based medical practitioners, then you can forge a relationship with them so that they can assist you on your path to full recovery. We will be looking at that further in this program. This whole week is dedicated to looking at all of these aspects. I don't want to overwhelm you, because there is a lot of information there. But what I will be doing is posting some articles and some podcasts that you can go and watch. Okay, so I think that is about all I need to say now. So that is how plant-based medicine has developed. It's practiced primarily by physicians that are aligned with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and we'll have a look at Dr. Bernard, who set that up. And we'll also be, when we reach that, we'll be giving you some links so you can go and have a cruise and have a look around and see which sort of plant-based doctors you like. You don't have to engage them, but you can get to know them, okay? And it makes it easier, because when you're out there trying to find information for whatever ailments or whatever conditions you've got, you have got a good idea who you can trust. And like I say, once again, it's not that the doctors who are not plant-based doctors are bad in any way. It's just that this is not an area that they have focused on, and so they do not know very much. I have a T-shirt on. Yes, there you go. Let me see, what does it say? Bringing food back into medicine. And this is for Doctors for Nutrition in Australia. And I was very fortunate to be able to join that in February in Melbourne this year, in 2019. And I was able to meet Dr. Bernard. I had my photo taken with him. I can't find it, but I had my photo taken with him. And it was a very informative evening. And it was so lovely for me to see so many young medical practitioners there. I had a dietitian, I had also a young doctor, both of them young females, and they kind of shyly said to me, "Are you vegan by any chance?" You know, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "I've been plant-based for 37 years, but vegan for 3. And they were like, "Oh, wow." And I asked them if they were, and they said not yet, but they had heard so many good things about plant-based nutrition and plant-based healing that they were very keen to learn about it. So that was wonderful. And I certainly hope that there is more and more training for doctors like that. And of course, once again, if there's more demand for it, there will be more training. So, okay, so I think that's about it for me. So, peace out from Denise.